November 3, 1944. 23,000 feet above the Philippine Sea, the tropical sun glinted off the canopy of a United States Navy fighter as it led a formation of 12 aircraft through scattered clouds. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell gripped the control stick of his Grumman Hellcat, his eyes scanning the horizon with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 18 months of combat. His wingmen flew in tight formation behind him, their confidence in their leader absolute. They had no idea that within the next 7 minutes they would witness something that would make them question whether their commander had completely lost his mind. What Mitchell's squadron believed would be a routine fighter sweep was about to transform into one of the most unorthodox aerial encounters of the Pacific Campaign. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What began as apparent madness would reveal itself as a calculated gamble that rewrote tactical aviation doctrine and turned certain defeat into a victory so complete it seemed impossible. The mission briefing that morning aboard the aircraft carrier USS Essex had been straightforward. Intelligence reports indicated increased activity from the opposing air forces near Leyte Gulf, and Mitchell's Fighting Squadron 15 had drawn the assignment to clear the skies ahead of the afternoon bombing runs. Mitchell, a 31-year-old former crop duster from Nebraska, had earned his reputation through steady competence rather than flashy heroics. His logbook recorded 147 combat missions, 23 confirmed victories, and 0 losses among pilots under his direct command. That final statistic was the one he valued most. As the formation cruised at their assigned altitude, Ensign Robert Chen, flying as Mitchell's wingman, noticed his commander's unusual behavior. Mitchell kept adjusting his altitude, climbing and descending in small increments, as if searching for something specific in the air itself. Chen had flown with Mitchell for 8 months and had never seen him exhibit such restless flying. Through his headset, Chen heard Mitchell's voice, calm but focused. Then Mitchell said, "I need everyone to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Do not, under any circumstances, break formation without my direct order. What we're about to do is going to look wrong. It's going to feel wrong. You're going to want to scatter. Do not." Lieutenant Thomas Garrett, leading the 2nd Division of 4 aircraft, responded with concern, evident in his voice. "Skipper, we reading this the same way? I've got what looks like a large formation at 2 o'clock high, maybe 15 miles out." Mitchell's response was immediate. "I see them, Tom. Count is 18, probably 20. They've got altitude advantage and numbers. Standard doctrine says we climb to meet them or dive for cloud cover." The tension in the radio silence that followed was palpable. Every pilot in the formation understood the mathematics of aerial combat. 20 enemy fighters against 12 friendly aircraft, with the enemy holding the high ground, represented a scenario that called for either reinforcement or retreat. What Mitchell said next seemed to contradict everything they had been trained to believe. "We're going to do neither," Mitchell continued. "We're going to maintain this altitude and heading. We're going to let them come to us, and we're going to let them think they've got us exactly where they want us." Chen watched his instruments, his mind racing. The opposing formation was now visible as dark specks against the brilliant sky, growing larger with each passing second. He could identify them now, Japanese Zero fighters, known for their agility and climb rate. The enemy aircraft were beginning their descent, clearly intending to use their altitude advantage to build speed for a devastating high-side attack. It was a textbook approach, one that had destroyed many American formations in the early years of the conflict. What Chen and the other pilots didn't know was that Mitchell had spent the previous 3 weeks analyzing after-action reports from across the Pacific theater. He had noticed a pattern in encounters where American formations suffered heavy losses. Enemy fighters, when presented with what appeared to be an unaware or disadvantaged target, would commit their entire force to a single coordinated attack, diving together to maximize their speed advantage and overwhelm defensive fire. It was effective, proven, and utterly predictable. Mitchell had also spent hours discussing aircraft performance with the Essex's engineering officer, Lieutenant Andrew Vasquez. The Grumman Hellcat, while not as maneuverable as the Zero, possessed 2 critical advantages that were often underutilized. Its radial engine could tolerate negative G maneuvers that would starve the Zero's inline engine of fuel, and its robust construction could withstand dive speeds that would tear apart lighter aircraft. Mitchell had developed a theory, one that no one had been willing to test under actual combat conditions. The enemy formation was now 4 miles distant, their descent angle steepening. Mitchell's voice came through the headset again, this time with an edge of urgency. "All aircraft, check your dive brakes are unlocked. When I give the command, you're going to push forward on your stick like you're trying to fly straight through the ocean, -4, -5 Gs. Your engine is going to cough, your airframe is going to scream, and you're going to think you're dying. You're not. Trust the airplane and trust me." Garrett's voice crackled back, disbelief clear in his tone. "Skipper, you want us to push over into a -G dive with bandits diving on us from above? That's suicide. We'll be defenseless, can't maneuver, can't shoot." Mitchell's response was firm. "Tom, in 45 seconds, those 20 aircraft are going to be in gun range. They're going to open fire expecting us to either climb into them or break formation and scatter. Either response lets them use their numbers and maneuverability. We're not going to do what they expect. We're going to do something they can't follow." The distance closed to 2 miles. Chen could now make out individual details on the approaching enemy fighters, the distinctive elliptical wings, the fixed landing gear on some of the older models. His hands were sweating inside his gloves, his heart pounding against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to break formation, to take evasive action, to do something other than fly straight and level toward an enemy force that was about to tear them apart. 1 mile. The first muzzle flashes appeared on the leading enemy aircraft. Tracers arced through the air, falling short by several hundred yards as the attacking fighters adjusted their aim. Mitchell's formation held steady, not a single aircraft deviating from course. To the Japanese pilots, it must have seemed like a formation of inexperienced or damaged aircraft, unable or unwilling to defend themselves. They pressed their attack with increasing confidence. "Now," Mitchell's voice cut through the radio with absolute authority. 12 Hellcats simultaneously pushed forward on their control sticks. The sensation was immediate and violent. Chen felt himself lifted against his shoulder straps as the aircraft pitched nose down into a dive that seemed to defy the laws of flight. His engine coughed once, twice, as fuel momentarily separated from the carburetor inlet. The airspeed indicator wound rapidly clockwise, 250 knots, 300, 350. But it was the rate of descent that made the maneuver so devastating. A conventional dive built speed through gravity and engine power over distance. What Mitchell had ordered was a -G pushover that used the aircraft's existing airspeed and momentum to create an instantaneous descent rate that no pursuing aircraft could match without structural failure. The Hellcat formation dropped through the sky like stones, descending 4,000 feet in less than 8 seconds. The Japanese formation, committed to their diving attack, suddenly found their targets vanishing beneath them at a rate of descent they couldn't possibly match. The lead enemy fighters, traveling at high speed in their attack dive, overshot completely. Several pilots attempted to follow, pushing their lighter aircraft into similar -G maneuvers. The results were catastrophic. 3 Zero fighters suffered immediate engine failure as their carburetors starved, their propellers windmilling uselessly as they fell away from the fight. 2 more experienced structural failures, their lighter airframes unable to withstand the stress loads, pieces of wing and tail surfaces separated in the slipstream. Mitchell's voice came through the radio again, steady despite the violent maneuver. "Level out, -1,000 feet on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark." The Hellcat formation pulled level at 18,000 feet, having descended 5,000 feet in approximately 11 seconds. Above them, the enemy formation was in complete disarray. The Japanese pilots who had maintained discipline and refused to follow the impossible dive now found themselves scattered across several thousand feet of altitude, their coordinated attack broken, their numerical advantage negated. What happened next demonstrated the second part of Mitchell's plan. The Hellcats, having bled off their excess speed during the level out, still maintained enough energy for what Mitchell called a zoom climb. In unison, the American formation pulled into a steep climb, their powerful engines hauling them back toward the scattered enemy aircraft. The advantage had reversed completely. Enemy fighters that had begun the engagement with superior altitude and numbers now found themselves facing a coordinated formation, attacking from below, with the energy advantage. Mitchell's squadron executed the attack with brutal efficiency. The Hellcats climbed through the scattered Japanese formation, each pilot selecting targets of opportunity among the disorganized enemy. Chen locked onto a Zero that was attempting to dive away. The enemy pilot, perhaps thinking that altitude loss was safety, had forgotten the basic rule of energy combat. Chen's Hellcat, climbing with power and momentum, closed the distance easily. A 2-second burst from his 650 caliber machine guns found their mark. The Zero's wing root erupted in fragments, and the aircraft rolled inverted and fell away. Across the sky, the engagement had transformed from a potential massacre of the American formation into a one-sided victory. Enemy aircraft that tried to maneuver found themselves facing multiple Hellcats with speed and position advantage. Those that attempted to flee discovered that the American fighters could catch them in level flight. The engagement lasted less than 4 minutes from Mitchell's initial dive command to the last enemy aircraft disappearing into the cloud layer below. When Garrett's voice came through the radio calling the count, the result seemed impossible. Scratch 9 bandits confirmed 2 probables, remaining enemy aircraft withdrawing to the west. Our losses, 0. Damage. Henderson's got some skin wrinkles from the dive, but everything's in the green. The flight back to the Essex was quiet, each pilot processing what had just occurred. Chen kept replaying the engagement in his mind, trying to reconcile what he had witnessed with everything he thought he understood about aerial combat. They had been outnumbered nearly 2 to 1, caught at a disadvantage, and had emerged without a single loss, while destroying nearly half the enemy force. It seemed to violate the fundamental mathematics of warfare. The landing aboard the carrier was routine, but the debriefing that followed was anything but. The Essex's Air Group Commander, Commander Richard Peterson, listened to Mitchell's account with an expression that shifted from skepticism to amazement. The gun camera footage, developed and reviewed within hours, confirmed every detail. The engagement had been so one-sided that intelligence officers initially suspected the enemy formation had been comprised of student pilots or obsolete aircraft. Analysis of the wreckage recovered by search aircraft proved otherwise. These had been frontline fighters with experienced pilots. What Mitchell had discovered, and proven under combat conditions, was that the negative G pushover created a tactical situation that conventional training hadn't addressed. Enemy pilots, trained to anticipate standard evasive maneuvers, had no prepared response to a defending formation that appeared to commit suicide by diving directly away from attacking aircraft. The Japanese pilots who attempted to follow had violated the performance limits of their aircraft, while those who maintained discipline lost the initiative and found themselves at a fatal disadvantage when the American formation reversed the engagement. Within 2 weeks, Mitchell was summoned to Pearl Harbor to present his tactics to the Pacific Fleet Aviation Training Command. His demonstration, using blackboards and aircraft models, was met with initial resistance from senior officers who had spent careers building conventional doctrine. The mathematics seemed impossible. How could a force give up altitude to an enemy that already held the high ground and emerge victorious? Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bradley, one of the few female aviation tactical officers in the Pacific Fleet, was the first to grasp the deeper principle. She stood at the briefing room blackboard and worked through the energy calculations, showing how the negative G dive created an instantaneous rate of descent that couldn't be matched without catastrophic structural or mechanical failure. The maneuver didn't violate physics. It exploited the different performance envelopes of different aircraft designs. The tactic was not without limitations, Bradley noted. It required aircraft with robust construction, fuel systems that could tolerate negative G flight, and pilots with the discipline to execute a maneuver that contradicted every survival instinct. It also only worked against enemies who would commit to following the dive. Against more cautious opponents, the American formation would simply be giving up altitude for no gain. But against aggressive enemy pilots, flying lighter aircraft, precisely the opponent's American pilots faced most frequently in the Pacific, the tactic was devastating. By February 1945, modified versions of Mitchell's pushover maneuver had been incorporated into training curricula across the Pacific Fleet. Squadrons began practicing the negative G dive until it became second nature, a tool to be deployed when the tactical situation warranted. The impact extended beyond individual engagements. Japanese aviation commanders, aware that their numerical advantage was being negated by American tactical innovations, became more conservative in their approach. Fighter sweeps that might have pressed attacks against numerically inferior American formations instead broke off when the Americans demonstrated willingness to execute unconventional maneuvers. The psychological effect of uncertainty proved as valuable as the tactic itself. Chen, who had thought his commander had lost his mind during those terrifying seconds of negative G flight, would later command his own squadron using principles he learned that day above the Philippine Sea. In his post-war memoir, he wrote about the moment when the Hellcat formation pulled level after the dive, and he saw the scattered enemy aircraft above them. It was, he wrote, like watching a chess grandmaster reveal that what appeared to be a desperate blunder was actually the setup for an unstoppable combination. The enemy had been outmaneuvered before the first shot was fired. Mitchell survived the conflict, returning to Nebraska with a Navy Cross and a reputation as one of the Pacific Theater's most innovative tactical thinkers. He never claimed to have invented anything revolutionary, merely, he said, to have thought carefully about how to use the tools he was given in ways that others hadn't considered. His post-war career included teaching at the Naval War College, where he emphasized the importance of understanding not just your own aircraft's capabilities, but also its limitations relative to your opponent's equipment. The 9 enemy aircraft destroyed in that November engagement represented more than simple statistics. Each represented a trained pilot, an aircraft that required thousands of hours of industrial production, and a small fraction of an enemy's diminishing ability to contest American air superiority. The engagement contributed to a broader pattern across the Pacific. American forces learning to leverage industrial and technological advantages through innovative tactics that multiplied the effectiveness of their numerical superiority. Perhaps the most significant aspect of Mitchell's innovation was how it changed the calculus of risk in aerial combat. Before that engagement, a formation caught at an altitude disadvantage faced a binary choice: climb to engage and suffer losses, or flee and concede the objective. Mitchell demonstrated a third option: maneuver in ways the enemy couldn't predict or counter, transforming disadvantage into opportunity. It was a lesson that extended far beyond the specific tactical situation, influencing how military aviators thought about problem-solving under pressure. The engineering officers aboard the Essex, led by Lieutenant Vasquez, conducted detailed inspections of the Hellcats after Mitchell's engagement. They found stress marks on several airframes, evidence of the forces involved in the negative G maneuver, but nothing approaching structural failure. The Grumman design philosophy, build it strong enough to absorb punishment and bring the pilot home, had proven itself in an entirely unexpected way. The company's engineers, when briefed on the engagement, were simultaneously horrified and proud. Horrified that their aircraft were being subjected to loads they hadn't specifically designed for. Proud that the inherent robustness of their design could tolerate such abuse. In the decades following the conflict, as aviation technology advanced and jet aircraft replaced propeller-driven fighters, the specific tactic Mitchell employed became obsolete. Modern aircraft and weapon systems operated under different performance parameters. But the principle, understand your tools deeply enough to use them in unexpected ways, and you can overcome seemingly impossible odds, remained relevant. Military academies studying the engagement focused less on the specific maneuver and more on the thought process that led to its development. Mitchell rarely spoke publicly about the engagement in his later years. When pressed by aviation historians, he would emphasize the role of his squadron mates, who executed a terrifying maneuver with absolute discipline despite their fear. The tactic only worked, he insisted, because 12 pilots trusted each other and their aircraft enough to do something that seemed suicidal. Individual brilliance meant nothing without collective execution. Chen maintained correspondence with Mitchell until the latter's passing in 1987. In one letter, Chen asked his former commander whether he had been certain the tactic would work, during those seconds before giving the order. Mitchell's response was characteristically honest. He had been 70% certain the aircraft could handle the maneuver, 90% certain the enemy would follow them down, and 50% certain his own pilots wouldn't break formation out of self-preservation instinct. In combat, he wrote, absolute certainty was a luxury no commander possessed. You made the best decision you could with the information available, committed fully to that decision, and accepted the consequences. The engagement above the Philippine Sea lasted less than 5 minutes, but its implications resonated through the remaining months of the Pacific Campaign and beyond. It demonstrated that numerical and positional disadvantages could be overcome through innovation and deep understanding of relative capabilities. It proved that conventional wisdom, while valuable, should never become dogma that prevents creative problem-solving. Most importantly, it showed that the human element, trust, discipline, and willingness to execute the unconventional, remained decisive even in an era of increasingly sophisticated technology. For the 12 pilots who executed that negative-G dive through space that seemed empty one moment and filled with enemy tracers the next, the experience left an indelible mark. They had faced what appeared to be certain defeat and discovered that their commander had seen a path to victory that existed only because he had thought more carefully about the problem than anyone else. Several of them carried that lesson into post-war careers in aviation, engineering, and military leadership, always asking whether the conventional approach was truly the best approach or simply the most familiar. The historical record of the engagement, preserved in official action reports, gun camera footage, and personal accounts, offers a window into how innovation occurs under pressure. Mitchell's tactic wasn't born from desperate improvisation in the moment of crisis, but from careful analysis of previous engagements, deep understanding of aircraft performance characteristics, and willingness to question established doctrine. The crisis simply provided the opportunity to test a hypothesis he had been developing for weeks. In the broader context of the Pacific conflict, the engagement represented a microcosm of American adaptation and learning. Early in the struggle, American forces had often found themselves at tactical and technical disadvantages against opponents with more combat experience and, in some cases, better suited equipment. But the combination of industrial capacity, technological innovation, and tactical flexibility allowed American forces to overcome these early setbacks. Mitchell's engagement was one small example of that larger pattern, identifying a problem, developing a solution, testing it under real conditions, and then disseminating successful innovations throughout the force. The enemy pilots who survived the engagement and made it back to their bases that day carried their own lessons. Several were interviewed after the conflict's end, and their accounts reveal the psychological impact of encountering a tactic they had no framework to understand. One pilot described watching the American formation simply vanish beneath him, diving at a rate he thought impossible for such heavy aircraft. When he attempted to follow, his engine died, and he barely managed to restart it at lower altitude. The experience, he said, made him question whether the Americans possessed some technological advantage in their aircraft that Japanese intelligence hadn't identified. This perception gap, the enemy attributing to technology what was actually tactical innovation, became its own form of psychological warfare. Japanese aviators became more cautious, more uncertain, less willing to press attacks even when they held numerical superiority. The cumulative effect of many such engagements, each introducing some element of unexpected American capability, eroded the confidence that had characterized enemy aviation in the conflict's early years. Mitchell's innovation also highlighted the importance of organizational cultures that rewarded experimentation. A more rigid command structure might have court-martialed an officer for executing an unauthorized tactical maneuver that risked 12 aircraft and their pilots. Instead, the Navy recognized the value of what Mitchell had discovered and moved quickly to capture and disseminate the lessons. This institutional flexibility, the ability to recognize good ideas regardless of their source and implement them rapidly, proved as valuable as any specific weapon system. For modern military aviators studying historical engagements, Mitchell's pushover maneuver serves as a case study in several principles. First, the importance of understanding not just what your equipment can do, but what it can do better than your opponent's equipment. Second, the value of analyzing patterns in combat data to identify exploitable tendencies in enemy tactics. Third, the necessity of training to a level where complex maneuvers become instinctive, allowing execution under the stress of combat. Fourth, the role of trust and cohesion within units, enabling them to execute tactics that require perfect coordination. The engagement also offers insights into decision-making under uncertainty. Mitchell made his decision to employ the pushover maneuver in the span of seconds, with incomplete information and lives hanging in the balance. He couldn't run simulations, consult with experts, or test the tactic under controlled conditions. He had to trust his analysis, his understanding of his aircraft, and his assessment of his pilot's capabilities. That he proved correct doesn't diminish the weight of that decision, or the courage required to commit to an untested tactic when conventional options existed. In the final analysis, what appeared to Mitchell's men as their commander losing control was actually control exercised at the highest level. Control of the tactical situation, control of his own fear, control of the engagement's geometry and energy state. The dive that seemed like madness was carefully calculated, the product of hours of study and thought. The victory that seemed impossible was actually probable, once you understood all the factors involved. That his squadron couldn't see the logic until after the engagement demonstrates the gap between tactical genius and tactical competence, and the importance of trust in bridging that gap. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.